Today on the show, is the New York Times guilty of anti-Semitism? Blatant anti-Semitism? Because judging by this cartoon I've got in front of me, sure looks like it.
Can't you see? Everyone! They're here already! You're next!
Let's go!
Welcome to the future, where the glass is half full and you'll need new glasses, where you'll be jumping from conclusions.
The past is annulled, and a new future is born!
Never before in history has so much meant so little to so many. AD on the radio.
You know, without exception, one thing that we do around here is avoid sensationalism. We avoid that sort of manufactured outrage. We avoid that whole sort of, gotta find something to be angry about, because anger, or at least the appearance of anger, feeds into other people's sense of outrage, and well, that'll lead to clicks, and that'll lead to money, and that'll lead to what is essentially the problem in the media in general these days, whether you fall down on the Fox News side of the situation or whether you fall down on the CNN side of the situation. People looking for something that's gonna make other folks see red, click something and get mad about it and share their opinion with a bunch of people that already agree with them. That's not what we do around here. And I'm not really interested in that. And the currency of outrage is something that doesn't interest me. So when I get angry on this show, or when I get angry in life in general, I kind of check myself before I take it on the air. I kind of run myself through a filter going, do I really feel that mad about this? Do I really feel that upset about this? Because I don't want to go on the air and be all screamy and yelly for the sake of being screamy and yelly, as much as that incites the right sort of outrage necessary to generate money in the media in 2019. It's not my stock in trade. It means I won't drive as nice a car as some other radio hosts. It means I won't live in as big a house as some other radio hosts. It means that I'll probably perpetually have to sell blood to make rent for the rest of my life. But hey, at least I cling on to my principles for what they are worth. And as we move forward and people seem to feel as though principles are a moving target that can be changed and adjusted and are malleable depending on what sort of mood you're in and what makes you money that sort of day, I think my principles become even more important. And basically what I'm saying is, I don't sit there and pretend to be angry for the sake of making money. And when my hackles do get raised, I kind of check myself before I go on the air with it. But I was aghast at what I saw in the New York Times. I don't know if you caught it or not, but it's not okay. I'm looking at it and going, you know what? I have a sense of humor. I'm into satire. I'm into all of these things. But regardless how you feel about the players involved, regardless of how you feel about Trump, regardless of how you feel about Netanyahu, this kind of caricature, this to me represents the slippery slope, and not even the beginning of the slippery slope. I'm talking about that caricature in the New York Times. Did you see it? The New York Times published this cartoon. It shows Benjamin Netanyahu as a big-nosed dog with a leash attached to him. Little Star of David collar attached to a leash that is held by Trump. Trump is portrayed as being blind and wearing a yarmulke. It's basically saying that the U.S. is being blindly led by the Jewish state. But the caricature is an ugly one, portraying the leader of Israel as a big-nosed dog. That's some ugly stuff. And there it is in the New York Times. And it makes me really kind of angry. I don't really have a particular side that I'm on. I don't really have a right or a left leaning. I take each issue and each person as they come. To me, as we've talked about many times on the show, politics are Coke and Pepsi, left and right. They're the same brown sugary water that'll rot your teeth. Calling themselves something different, but really they're quite similar. I don't have religious loyalties. I'm not into any kind of fear-mongering. I think Islamophobia is a horrific thing. I think anti-Semitism is a horrific thing. But when I see something that reminds me of the caricatures of Jewish people that I saw in history books when reading about Hitler and the Third Reich, it makes me unbelievably uncomfortable. It's some ugly stuff. And it's uglier still that this is in the New York Times. Maybe I'm overreacting. I don't think I am. But it made me sick to my stomach when I saw the cartoon. If you want, go ahead and Google it. New York Times. Benjamin Netanyahu being portrayed as a big-nosed dog with a Star of David collar attached to a leash that is being held by a blind Donald Trump wearing a yarmulke. Yeah. If the image sounds ugly, then you don't need to go look at it because, well, I'm looking at it for you. It's ugly. And this wasn't on the KKK's website. This wasn't on some sketchy anti-Semitic blog somewhere. This is in the New York Times. New York Times columnist Bret Stephens took his own paper to task for publishing the cartoon. He wrote, as prejudices go, anti-Semitism can sometimes be hard to pin down. But on Thursday, the opinions page of the New York Times International Edition provided a textbook illustration of it, except that the Times wasn't explaining anti-Semitism. It was purveying it. It did so in the form of a cartoon, provided to the newspaper by a wire service and published directly above an unrelated column by Tom Friedman, in which a guide dog with a prideful countenance and the face of Benjamin Netanyahu leads a blind, fat Donald Trump wearing dark glasses and a black yarmulke. Lest there be any doubt as to the identity of the dog man, it wears a collar from which hangs a Star of David. Here was an image that in other ages might have been published in the pages of Nazi propaganda. The Jew in the form of the dog. The small but wily Jew leading the dumb and trusting American. And there it is. New York Times. This cannot be normalized.
Real radio.
104.1.
Where the left and right come together for fundamental truths. AD on the radio, on Twitter at ADSXE.
You know, I suppose the most disappointing part of it, besides the sickness in the pit of my stomach that I feel when I look at something like this, imagery that is either anti-Semitic or Islamophobic or marginalizes any people with their faith. I think the thing that upsets me the most about this sort of thing is the fact that we have, as a species, failed to evolve. This ongoing global conflict of faith over a distinctly barren patch of land purported by a couple different beliefs. That has caused untold amounts of global bloodshed. Because 2,000 years ago, one guy showed up and said, hey, it would be really nice to be nice to each other for a change. So foolish, so foolhardy, so wasteful, so destructive, so indicative of our inability as a species to get out of our own freaking way. The fact that we continue to shed blood over religious divides sickens me. But the fact that we haven't evolved past this, and the fact that we seem to be devolving to the point where something like this can be published in the New York Times, and the editorial staff there can go, all right, yeah, sure, why not? What do we got here? A picture of a blind Donald Trump wearing a yarmulke being led around by a big-nosed dog that looks like Benjamin Netanyahu wearing a Star David collar. Yes, don't see any problem there. Hold the presses. This is a humdinger. The hell, man? What the hell? I mean, I don't know who on the New York Times signed off on this. Obviously, a lot of the fault lies with them. But it's indicative of a look that we must take at ourselves in terms of where we are as a society, that someone would go, yeah, that seems like a good idea. That's fine. A cartoon of a small, wily Jew leading a dumb, trusting American blindly. It's unfreaking real. As Brett Stevens said, the New York Times columnist that took his own paper to task for its anti-Semitism, the cartoon checked so many anti-Semitic boxes that the only thing missing was a $sign. And there was an obvious political message as well, namely that in the current administration, the United States follows wherever Israel wants to go. And there's this, and it's a very weird thing. We've talked about it a lot on the show. But a lot of my friends who are Jewish and liberal and based in New York that are longtime Democrats are sort of wondering what they're going to be doing with themselves moving forward, because there's this growing fear of anti-Semitism on the left. Look, it's a very, very complicated situation. What's going on in the Middle East and what has been going on in the Middle East for thousands of years. But this thing where persecution of a faith is being normalized, where anti-Semitism is on the rise again, and a big chunk of that seems to be coming from within the Democratic Party. This has got a lot of my friends that live in New York that are Jewish wondering exactly where they belong. And people of the Jewish faith wondering where they belong, historically speaking, this hasn't led to good times for the world. And so, yeah, it's reproachable and awful that the New York Times did this, and whoever signed off on it should be reprimanded, fired, whatever. It's unthinkable, it's unbelievable, it's unimaginable, it's un-American, it's unpatriotic, if you ask me. But it is an alarm bell that goes off in my mind and says, whoa, this looks a lot like Nazi propaganda. When I was in history class learning about the Holocaust, we saw cartoons like this in textbooks. This was not the precursors to good times for humanity. I mean, the obvious political message to this cartoon is that Donald Trump will blindly follow Israel wherever Israel wants to lead him. And it's beside the point, but that's not true. Israel was all sorts of bent out of shape when Trump announced last year that he intended to withdraw U.S. forces from Syria. So it's not like he's just going along to get along, because that stokes the fires of Islamophobia that has his voter base riled up, as the implication would be. The problem is that there are ways There are ways to criticize Donald Trump's approach to Israel. You can do it in word. You can do it via satirical political cartoon. But this is not okay. This is not cool. This is not even a little bit cool. This is a slippery slope, and we are on it if we don't say something or do something or say this is not for us and we will not behave like this. It's unbelievably hateful, divisive stuff. In the same way that I would have a problem with anybody that is a purveyor of blatant Islamophobia, I would have a problem with this. I would have a problem with anybody using religious stereotypes as a linchpin for any kind of political campaigning. It's an ugly side of humanity that, like I said, we should have evolved past a long time ago. And you know what? The sick, sad part of it is it works. It's crazy. You see these unruly battle lines being drawn. Islamophobia on the right. And bizarrely enough, unbelievably enough, horrifically enough, antisemitism on the left. Lots of people not sure where their allegiances lie anymore. Lots of people not sure who stands for what and what they stand for and what they're a part of and what they're a registered voter for. But I can tell you this confusion, this disarray, this division that this is indicative of, this is a giant win for the enemies of America. This is exactly the sort of thing that the Kim Jongs and the Putins gleefully rub their hands over. This is the sort of thing that makes Russia go, why are we wasting our time with these bots on Twitter? The tacit approval that America has of the New York Times blatant anti-Semitism is doing all our work for us. We don't need people to write code anymore. We'll be just fine. They'll destroy each other. No, we can't play into the hands of the enemy. We got to be able to get on the same page. We've got to be able to go, hey, I know this sounds overly simple. I know this is stuff that we learned when we were 5, but regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of your political beliefs, regardless of your religious beliefs, I respect you because you're another human being and you haven't really done anything to me that would make me not respect you. People need to be allowed to have differences of opinion in religion. And it can't devolve into this kind of nastiness. It cannot. We are better than this. I know we are better than this, but maybe we're not acting like it at the moment. And I know this has nothing to do with you. I know you don't work at the New York Times. I know you didn't draw the cartoon. I know you're not going along to get along. I know you're not brushing it under the rug. But because other people aren't doing this, we have to stand up and we have to be better. And you know, it's not that hard to be better. The bar's set pretty low here. All we have to do, it's so important, but it's so simple. All we have to do is be cool to each other.
For more stimulation and less irritation, 9 out of 10 doctors choose KPRC AM 950, Houston's more stimulating talk radio.
Don't get the blues, get all the news. We mean all of you guys out there in Radioland. All aboard!
He's back. AD on the radio.
Give it up, yeah. Give it up, yeah. Bring this on, come on, come on.
So if you are just joining us, we're talking about this horrific cartoon that the New York Times said, okay, that's a good idea, let's run with that, about. The picture of Benjamin Netanyahu portrayed as a big-nosed dog wearing a collar with a Jewish Star of David on it, leading around a blind Donald Trump wearing a yarmulke. The political belief that it represents is that Benjamin Netanyahu exploits religious loyalties to get Donald Trump to do his bidding and has the U.S. in his pocket. Now, you might believe that. Look, I said that. That's an easy statement to make, right? Hey, we feel as though Benjamin Netanyahu has exploited Donald Trump supporters' loyalty to the Judeo-Christian infrastructure as a means to get Donald Trump to do things that are unwise and politically injudicious in terms of America's involvement, not only in local and national politics, but also globally speaking. Oh, look, you can say that stuff without hateful cartoons. It's pretty freaking simple. And like I said, the cartoon checked so many anti-Semitic boxes that the only thing missing was a dollar sign. We've been talking about New York Times columnist Bret Stephens, and he's been taking his own paper to task over this. And he himself pointed out that there are legitimate ways to criticize Donald Trump's approach to Israel. But he also dug into a little bit. The New York Times has, according to him, a long-standing Jewish problem dating back to the Second World War, when it mostly buried news about the Holocaust and continuing into present day in the form of intensely adversarial coverage of Israel. And the criticism goes double when it comes to the editorial pages, whose overall approach toward the Jewish state tends to range, with some notable exceptions, from tut-tutting disappointment to thunderous condemnation. Now, this is really weird. Because, well, this is unbelievable anti-Semitism. Blatant anti-Semitism. Either that, or you could classify it as blatant ignorance of anti-Semitism. What? It's just a big-nosed Jewish dog leading a blind Donald Trump around. Is that wrong? Oh. But this is also a publication that, as he points out, is hyper alert to nearly every conceivable expression of prejudice. Mansplaining, racial microaggressions, transphobia, institutionalized racism. Very sensitive to all of that. As well, one should be, if one's going to be a responsible member of the media. But that in and of itself is why it's so disheartening. If these were knuckle-dragging, ignorant folks that had no real knowledge of prejudice, or were so insensitive to this sort of thing that they just dished it out left, right, and center, that would be one thing. But the fact that, okay, no, let's be cool with microaggressions, transphobia, or race, or mansplaining, but it's perfectly okay to draw this horrific cartoon and okay it. What the hell, man? Think for a second what it would have been like if the dog on the leash hadn't been the Prime Minister of Israel, but instead Nancy Pelosi, a prominent woman, a person of color like John Lewis, or a Muslim like Ilhan Omar. Would that have gone unnoticed by either the wire service that provided the Times with images, or the editor who, even if he were working in haste, selected it? The question answers itself. And it raises a follow-on. How have even the most blatant expressions of anti-Semitism become almost undetectable to editors who think it's part of their job to stand up to bigotry? It's a valid point, and I hate the whataboutism that dominates the 24-hour news cycle. Well, he did this. What about that? Well, he did something wrong. What about what she said or did? Me. I hate whataboutism. It's well established that two wrongs don't make a right, but in this situation, you have to just say, how can you possibly be so protective of people that have been victims of prejudice? Rightfully so. How can you be so protective of people of color? How can you be so protective of women? How can you be so protective of Muslims? How can you be so protective of all these minorities, but then let this one just slip through? It's unconscionable. It's weird. It just makes you go, oh, wow. You hate Jewish people, don't you? That's the only logical explanation. You cannot purport to be a beacon of what is right. You cannot protect some minorities and then go, yeah, except for the Jews. Let's draw this filthy, disgusting Third Reich-esque cartoon about it and act like it's nothing. You don't get to have it both ways and have people not come to the conclusion that you got a problem with people because of their religion. Which is just, like I said, a sad place to be. Because if the New York Times does have a largely anti-Semitic faction within its editorial ranks, how sad is that? We were supposed to have evolved past this. This is an age-old problem that is beneath us as a species, yet we are devolving back into it, and it's sad, and it's disgusting, and it's something that we have to stand up against. So long as anti-Semitic arguments or images are framed, however, speciously as commentary about Israel, they're going to be viewed as political opinion, not as ethnic prejudice. And this is where it gets sticky, having religious nations. This is, I think, one of the main reasons why we go, ooh, separation of church and state seems like a good idea. Because it opens the door to ethnic prejudice disguised as political conjecture. And look, this is the Middle East. This is Israel and Palestine. This is a conflict that invokes, because they are religiously led countries, people's religious loyalties. And people's religious loyalties are a big deal. It's very hard to get around. But at the same time, we got to be better than this. This is a country where church and state are supposed to be and should be separate. But we're on a path to self-destruction if we do not stand up to religious prejudice, regardless of whether it affects you directly or not. You may be Jewish, you may be Muslim, you might be Christian, you might be something that is completely out of the way of this conflict. You might be Buddhist. You might not have any kind of stake in the game, but I'm telling you now, you, me, all of us, no matter what we believe or do not believe, you might be agnostic, you might be an atheist. By the way, the atheists right now are going, see? Told you. Religion. Nothing but problems. But regardless of your faith or lack of faith, this idea that anti-Semitic prejudice can sneak in through the back door, disguised as political opinion and conjecture, and have it be okay, because we saw this cartoon in the New York Times and that's become the new normal. No, it's not okay. That can't be the new normal. You and I have to be better. That's just it. That's the end of the story. We got to be better as human beings. You might love Trump. You might despise Trump. You might think that him and his position on Israel might be an abhorrent thing. You might think it's the right thing to do. I don't care. And nor should you. What matters is that we don't fall victim to the political divides disguised as religion that are creeping in to our everyday life. I think they stopped creeping as of this past Thursday just gone by when the New York Times ran that cartoon. It was blatant, it was obvious, it was horrific. We can't fall for it. This is not the Inquisition, this is not the Crusades, this is 2019 and we are better than this. Or at least I hope we are.
You're waiting to get washed away.
more AD on the radio.
Back once again, the ill behavior, delivering and giving you my musical savior. Back once again, it's your boy AD again. Nobody rock a body better than me. Back once again, the ill behavior, delivering and giving you a musical savior.
You know, you might be somebody that's been listening to me for a little while. You might have heard me, when I started on the radio like 15 years ago. I was this punk-ass kid in my early 20s, fresh out of a screaming punk rock band, and, well, my show was about as immature as you would expect from someone out of a screaming punk rock band. But I have to tell you, sometimes the subjects that you and I get into on this show, the weight of humanity's problems that you and I sometimes take on doing this sort of thing, can wear you the hell down a little bit and make you wish for a bit of a simpler time. I think it's a big part of the reason why Jon Stewart got out of The Daily Show. I'd heard a number of different things, besides the fact that it took every ounce of his fiber of being to crank that show out for all those years. A big part of why he didn't want to do it anymore is because he was completely destroying any sense of optimism he had remaining. And he would take this sheer lack of faith in humanity home to his family, and it just wasn't a good place for him to be decade after decade. It's part of the reason why he got out. So it makes it important that you and I have fun, and it makes it important that you and I, talk a little bit about what it was like when we were younger. And you know who did a beautiful job at that? I mean, the guy is hilarious. The guy is so funny. The guy is obviously lauded as one of the single greatest comedians of all time, but Jerry Seinfeld is an incredible storyteller and a man who can make you think about what exactly it was like to be a kid and make you remember and connect with all the important parts of being a kid like he did here.
You know, there was no Chuck E. Cheese and Toys R Us. There was none of that. You just did whatever your parents were doing. Wherever they had to go, I would go. So my mother would want to go to the wallpaper store. That was my day, and that was my mother's favorite store. She loved those giant books of wallpaper. She would read them, turn the pages. It was like the Quran. Huge. She was looking at the patterns. Yes, I understand what they're saying. And when you're a little kid in these places, you can't really take it. The boredom is so intense. It's so powerful. When you're 5 and you get bored, you cannot support your body weight. You're literally I would just get down. I had to get down. I remember going to the bank with my parents, and you don't even know what a bank is. You just say, I can't handle this. I don't even know what this is. And I would lie down flat. Just, sorry, Mom, there's nothing I can do. This place is so dull, I cannot get up. This is what I think adulthood is. Adulthood is the ability to be totally bored and remain standing. You're on a long line somewhere, no problem.
When I first started out on the radio, the vast majority of my show consisted of Yo Mama jokes. I was like a Yo Mama joke ninja. It was my great source of pride and my listeners' great source of amusement, as was evidenced by the ratings that I got doing this, that I could turn literally anything into Yo Mama jokes. Here's the thing, though. Despite the ratings being what they were when I had a mostly Yo Mama joke-based show, I stopped doing that sort of thing because, inevitably, there are some people that did not take it in the spirit in which it was intended. And here's the thing about being on the radio. You're there whether people want you to be there or not. They turn on your favorite station and there you are. This is a big mistake that a lot of radio station personalities make when they assume that they are a stand-up comedian. Here's the thing. No one's buying a ticket to your show. They're either going to be there or they're not going to be there. And look, bottom line, I'm not overly worried about offending people, but I want to be able to bring people together. I want to be able to gather folks together. I want to be a source of comfort. I want to add value to people's lives. And sometimes that's going to be with some mind-numbingly childish bits of humor. Sometimes it's going to be with conversation. Sometimes it's going to be with music when I'm on the radio doing music radio. But I didn't want to drive anyone away. And there were people that didn't take the Yo Mama jokes, like I said, in the spirit in which they were intended. So I kind of stopped doing them as big as the ratings wins were, doing that. Couldn't freaking believe it. My boss couldn't believe it. He was like, seriously, you're just going to do Yo Mama jokes? I'm like, stay with me on this one. And, well, the ratings soared. But inevitably, some people wound up with hurt feelings. And I'm a person that does what I do for a lot of reasons, but hurting feelings is not one of my objectives. It's something that I want to avoid at all costs. I want to be able to bring people together. I want to make people feel good. So I cut out the Yo Mama jokes. But I was reminded by this of the exuberance of youth, of having just gotten on the radio, and, well, of the sheer creativity that can come with a well-crafted Yo Mama joke.
Your mama's so fat when she goes to the movies, she sits next to everyone.
Your mama's so fat when she goes in a restaurant, she looks at the menu and says, okay.
Your mama's so fat she has to iron her pants on the driveway.
Your mama's so fat she puts her lipstick on with a paint roller.
Your mama's so fat she has to pull down her pants to get in her pocket.
Your mama's so fat you have to take a train and 2 buses just to get on her good side.
Your mama's so fat she has to wake up in sections.
Your mama's so fat she sat on a quarter and a booger popped out of George Washington's nose.
Your mama's so fat she put on some BVDs, and by the time she got them on, they spelled Boulevard.
See, like I said, Yo Mama jokes, when done correctly, they are not without artistic merit. All right, then, let's take a look at the events of today in our segment, My Witness News. If you are suffering from a lack of confidence, maybe a lack of self-esteem, did you hear what psychologists recommend that you do? Psychologists recommend that if you're suffering from low self-esteem, you go see The Avengers. Why? Well, as it turns out, there's actually some science behind this. According to a new study, watching a superhero movie boosts your self-esteem. You see the superheroes on the screen, you all of a sudden feel more confident and heroic and capable of accomplishing things that maybe you couldn't before watching it. And I have to tell you, it's true. After watching The Avengers recently, I realized that I felt way less self-conscious about wearing my underwear outside of my pants. Yeah, don't like it? As my shrink keeps reminding me, that's a you problem, not a me problem. Hey, have you heard of the smart ice cube? Yeah, you've heard of the smartphone. You probably have a smartphone. You might be listening to me on your smartphone right now, and thank you very much, by the way. You heard of the smartphone, the smart car, the smart watch, the smart TV, but the smart ice cube? What is it? How does it work? It actually could save your life. The smart ice cube was invented by an MIT graduate. They came up with a smart ice cube that, get this, warns you when you've had too much to drink. Although I think most people already know that if an ice cube starts talking to you, telling you that you're drunk, it is definitely time to go home. So if you are planning on going to Coachella next year, maybe your kids are planning on going to Coachella. Maybe you've seen people's Instagram pictures of Coachella and you're thinking, hey, that looks like a good time. Word of warning, you want to think very carefully about what you do while you are there. Apparently, there's been an unexpected and somewhat nasty, disgusting health hazard that has popped up in the wake of Coachella. What is it? There's been a massive surge in people getting prescriptions for herpes in communities surrounding Coachella since the festival ended. Yeah, apparently Coachella gives you herpes, an itchy burning sensation in the most intimate of areas. Go to Coachella, get herpes. When you think about it, though, it's ironic that Coachella is likely to turn you into a Burning Man. All right, that is it for me. Thank you so much for hanging. Thank you for being a part of my radio family. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll do it all over again. Later.